Hey guys, tonight we're stepping through the towering oak doors of a medieval royal court, where the air hangs thick with incense, ambition, and the ever-present threat of political annihilation. You can almost hear the rustle of silk against stone floors, the whispered conspiracies echoing through vaulted ceilings, and the soft clink of jeweled daggers hidden beneath velvet cloaks. Here, in this glittering maze of power, every gesture carries weight, every word could be your last, and your survival depends entirely on navigating a world where the wrong bow could cost you your head. You probably won't survive this. Most people who stumbled into medieval courts without proper preparation found themselves either banished, imprisoned, or worse, by sunset. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. I love seeing our little community spread across different time zones, all settling in for the night together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The cathedral bells of Westminster are chiming 4 in the morning, and you're already failing miserably at medieval court life. While you're still dreaming of hitting the snooze button, the entire royal household has been stirring for an hour in the pre-dawn darkness. You see, medieval courts didn't operate on your modern sleep schedule. They functioned according to a rhythm as rigid and unforgiving as the stone walls that surrounded them. Your first mistake is assuming you can wake up when your body feels ready. In the court of Edward III, for instance, the day began at what medieval chroniclers called the Hour of Lauds, that mystical time when dawn was still just a rumor on the eastern horizon. The royal chaplains were already conducting the first of 7 daily prayer services, their Latin chants echoing through corridors where you're still stumbling around in your undergarments, desperately trying to figure out how medieval people managed to function without coffee. But here's where things get interesting, and by interesting, I mean absolutely terrifying for someone like you. The awakening protocol wasn't just about getting up early. It was an elaborate social ritual that immediately separated the wheat from the chaff, the born courtiers from the hapless imposters. You walk into this world thinking you can wing it, but medieval court culture had been refined over centuries into a system so complex that even native participants spent years learning its intricacies. The moment you open your eyes in your assigned chamber, and trust me, the quality of that chamber already broadcast your status to everyone within a mile radius. You're expected to know exactly who you can speak to, how you should address them, and what your first actions should be. There's no medieval orientation manual, no helpful servants explaining the rules. You either know the protocol, or you reveal yourself as an outsider within minutes of consciousness. Let's say you've been granted a room in the upper castle, which would have been a tremendous privilege. You're sharing this space with at least 3 other courtiers of similar rank, and the way you interact with them during those first groggy moments establishes your social position for the entire day. You can't just roll over and grunt "good morning" like you would to your college roommate. Medieval court etiquette demanded that you acknowledge each person according to their precise rank relative to yours, using the correct forms of address, and in the proper order. But here's the catch: you don't know anyone's rank. That well-dressed young man stretching in the corner might be a duke's son, or he could be a minor knight's nephew trying to climb the social ladder. Get it wrong, and you've just committed a social error that will follow you through the corridors all day long. Medieval courts operated on reputation and precedent, and your first interaction with each person created expectations for all future encounters. Now, assuming you somehow navigate the bedroom dynamics without causing a diplomatic incident, you face the next challenge: personal hygiene in an era when privacy was a luxury reserved for the highest nobility. You're not stepping into your private bathroom with hot running water and modern conveniences. Instead, you're joining a communal washing ritual that follows strict hierarchical rules about who washes when, where, and with what quality of water and soap. The washing protocol alone reveals how unprepared you are for this world. Medieval courts used a system of shared basins, where the order of washing reflected social status with mathematical precision. You watch as the highest-ranking courtiers step forward first, using fresh water that servants have heated over fires lit before dawn. They have access to imported soaps made from olive oil and aromatic herbs, luxury items that cost more than most peasants saw in a year. But where do you fit in this hierarchy? You have no idea, and hesitation is almost as damaging as presumption. Stand back too long, and you signal that you consider yourself beneath everyone. Present a position that, once established, becomes nearly impossible to change. Push forward too aggressively, and you insult people whose enmity could destroy your court prospects before breakfast. Medieval chroniclers loved recording stories of newcomers who misread these early morning signals and found themselves socially isolated by noon. There's a particularly entertaining account from the court of Richard II about a wealthy merchant's son who arrived with letters of introduction but made the fatal error of washing his hands before a baron's younger brother. The insult was so grave that the merchant's son found himself eating at the lowest table for his entire visit, despite having brought gifts worth a small fortune. Here's where it gets even more complicated, and I promise we're still in the first hour of your medieval court day. The washing ritual isn't just about cleanliness. It's a complex social negotiation where alliances are formed, information is exchanged, and tomorrow's political landscape begins taking shape. While you're focused on the basic mechanics of not drowning in a basin of lukewarm water, experienced courtiers are conducting subtle diplomatic conversations. They're discussing which lords seem to be rising in royal favor, whose lands might be available for redistribution, which marriages are being negotiated, and what military campaigns might be forming on the horizon. This information isn't casual gossip, it's intelligence that could make or break fortunes. Medieval courts were information markets where knowledge translated directly into power, and the morning washing ritual was one of many venues where that knowledge changed hands. But you're missing all of this because you're still trying to figure out whether that substance they're calling soap is actually safe to use on human skin. Medieval soap was quite different from your modern expectations. It was harsh, alkaline, and sometimes contained ingredients that would horrify contemporary chemists. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of lye-based soaps actually improved medieval hygiene or simply replaced one set of skin problems with another. The clothing situation presents another immediate crisis. You brought what you thought was appropriate medieval attire, perhaps you even spent considerable money on historically accurate reproductions. But medieval court dress wasn't just about looking the part. It was a complex signaling system that communicated your family background, regional loyalty, current alliances, and aspirations with the precision of a modern barcode. Every element of your outfit carries meaning that you're completely unaware of. The color of your hose indicates your regional affiliations. The style of your belt buckle suggests your family's military traditions. The number of buttons on your doublet signals your economic status. The quality of fur trim on your cloak broadcasts your access to international trade networks. Medieval courtiers could read these signals instantly, constructing elaborate mental dossiers about newcomers based purely on their appearance. Your modern reproductions, however accurate they might seem to contemporary eyes, immediately mark you as an outsider. The fabric was woven on modern looms with contemporary thread. The dyes were created using modern chemistry. The stitching follows modern patterns. The overall effect, while superficially medieval, lacks the subtle markers that authentic medieval clothing would display. More critically, you're missing the social context that gave medieval clothing its meaning. That beautiful blue doublet you're so proud of might accidentally signal that you're aligned with a particular political faction that's currently out of royal favor. The cut of your sleeve could suggest military aspirations that contradict your supposed civilian status. The absence of certain decorative elements might imply family connections that you don't actually possess. Medieval courtiers were constantly updating their wardrobes to reflect changing political realities. A wise courtier might own multiple versions of the same garment in different colors, allowing them to adjust their visual messaging based on daily court dynamics. They understood that clothing was political communication, and they dressed accordingly. You, meanwhile, are wearing your single medieval outfit with the confidence of someone who thinks they've nailed the costume requirements, completely unaware that you're broadcasting contradictory social signals with every step you take through the castle corridors. The breakfast bells are beginning to ring, and you realize you've already spent 2 hours navigating wake-up protocols that seem simple in your modern imagination. You've managed to offend at least 3 people through cultural misunderstandings, revealed your outsider status to anyone paying attention, and accidentally aligned yourself with political factions you've never heard of. And this is just the beginning. The day stretches ahead of you with challenges that will test every assumption you've ever made about medieval life, courtly behavior, and your own ability to adapt to radically different social systems. The other courtiers are already moving toward the great hall for the morning meal, their movements displaying the fluid grace that comes from years of practice in these elaborate social rituals. You follow behind, hoping that somehow the rest of the day will prove easier than these first few hours. It won't. The morning light filtering through the great hall's stained glass windows reveals your next catastrophe in brilliant, unforgiving detail. Medieval court dress wasn't just clothing, it was armor in a social war zone, and you're walking into battle wearing the equivalent of a target painted on your back. Every thread, every seam, every decorative element of your outfit is screaming information about you to a room full of people who've spent their entire lives learning to decode these visual messages. You pause at the entrance to the great hall, watching the assembled courtiers, and suddenly realize you're facing a sartorial minefield that makes this morning's washing protocols look like child's play. The sheer complexity of what everyone else is wearing begins to dawn on you as your eyes adjust to the scene. These aren't just people dressed in medieval clothing theory walking encyclopedias of social information. They're garments telling intricate stories about family histories, political alliances, military achievements, and economic resources that stretch back generations. The first thing that hits you is the overwhelming sensory assault of medieval court fashion. The colors are more vibrant than anything you expected, achieved through expensive dyes that required international trade networks to obtain. That stunning crimson worn by the Duchess near the high table came from cochineal insects imported from distant lands, costing more per ounce than silver. The deep blue adorning several prominent courtiers required lapis lazuli ground into powder and mixed with binding agents, a process so expensive that wearing it was essentially displaying your family's wealth in liquid form. But you're not just looking at expensive color theory, witnessing a complex communication system that operates according to rules you don't understand. The way that young Baron has arranged his cloak indicates his current relationship with the crown. The specific angle of that lady's headdress signals her marital status and family connections. The number of jewels adorning various courtiers reflects not just their wealth but their current standing in intricate networks of favor and obligation. Your own outfit, which seemed so carefully researched and historically accurate when you put it on this morning, now feels like a costume from a discount theater production. The fabric itself betrays you. Modern weaving techniques create textures that no medieval craftsman could have achieved. The thread count is wrong, the drape doesn't fall correctly, and the overall effect is somehow both too perfect and completely artificial. Medieval textiles carried their own stories embedded in the weave. Fabric woven in Flemish workshops had distinctive characteristics that marked the wearer as connected to specific trade relationships. English wool processed in particular regions developed unique qualities that knowledgeable observers could identify at a glance. Italian silks brought different social implications than Byzantine imports. These weren't just fashion choices, they were economic and political statements that positioned the wearer within complex international relationships. The construction of your garments reveals equally problematic issues. Medieval tailoring followed principles that modern reproduction often misses entirely. The way seams were finished, how padding was distributed, Which techniques were used to create shape and structure? All of these elements followed traditions that had evolved over centuries to solve specific practical and social problems. Medieval courtiers didn't just wear clothes, they inhabited them. Their garments were designed to facilitate the complex physical rituals that court life demanded, the precise angles required for proper bowing, the range of motion needed for ceremonial dancing, the strategic placement of decorative elements that would catch light during formal presentations. Your modern reproduction looks the part when you're standing still, but the moment you try to move naturally through courtly protocols, its inadequacies become glaringly obvious. The shoes present their own catastrophe. Medieval court footwear was essentially specialized equipment designed for specific social functions. The pointed toes that seem so impractical to modern eyes actually served important purposes. They forced the wearer to move with the measured, dignified pace that courtly decorum required. The construction used techniques that created distinctive sound patterns when walking across stone floors, allowing experienced courtiers to identify approaching individuals without looking up from their conversations. Your reproduction shoes, however historically accurate they might appear, sound wrong against the flagstones. They create modern rhythms that mark you as an outsider to anyone listening. Medieval ears were trained to decode information from these acoustic signatures. They could determine social rank, emotional state, and even political affiliations from the sound of approaching footsteps. The jewelry situation reveals another layer of complexity you never anticipated. Medieval court jewelry wasn't just decoration, it was a portable library of personal and family history. Each piece told specific stories about military achievements, marriage alliances, religious devotions, and political loyalties. The rings alone could communicate elaborate genealogical information to anyone educated enough to read their symbolic language. But here's where things get particularly treacherous for someone in your position. Medieval jewelry often carried legal implications that extended far beyond mere fashion. Certain types of pieces could only be worn by individuals who held specific titles or had achieved particular ranks. Wearing the wrong brooch or displaying an inappropriate pendant could constitute a form of fraud that carried serious legal consequences. The gemstones themselves operated according to complex symbolic systems that varied by region, era, and political context. A sapphire might indicate royal favor in one court while suggesting dangerous political associations in another. Pearls carried different meanings depending on how they were arranged, their size, and the other elements they were paired with. Even the metals used in settings communicated information about the wearer's relationships with various mining regions and trade guilds. Your modern jewelry, even if it uses period-appropriate techniques and materials, lacks the historical provenance that gave medieval pieces their meaning. You're wearing symbols without understanding their significance, potentially claiming achievements you never earned or suggesting family connections that don't exist. The headwear situation adds another dimension of complexity that's making your mourning increasingly uncomfortable. Medieval court head coverings weren't just fashion accessories, they were elaborate social signaling devices that communicated marital status, family rank, regional loyalty, and religious devotion with remarkable precision. The angle at which a headdress was worn, the specific materials used in its construction, even the way ornamental elements were arranged all carried specific meanings that experienced courtiers could read instantly. Women's headdresses were particularly complex, operating according to rules that seemed to change based on subtle variations in court politics and social dynamics. The height of a hennin could indicate the wearer's current standing in the queen's favor. The transparency of a veil suggested specific types of family relationships. The presence or absence of certain decorative elements communicated information about inheritance rights and marriage negotiations. But medieval men's head coverings carried equally complex messages. The style of a cap indicated military experience and regional affiliations. The presence of feathers suggested specific types of achievements or royal recognition. Even the way a hood was constructed and worn communicated information about the wearer's education, travel experience, and professional accomplishments. Your modern approximation of medieval headwear immediately identifies you as someone who doesn't understand these communication systems. You're wearing symbols that might contradict other aspects of your appearance, creating a visual confusion that experienced courtiers find both amusing and suspicious. The undergarments present problems you never even considered. Medieval foundation garments weren't just practical necessities, they were engineering solutions that created the specific silhouettes that court fashion demanded. The padding, corseting, and structural support required to achieve authentic medieval clothing lines couldn't be replicated with modern undergarments designed for contemporary fashion. Your modern foundation wear is creating the wrong shapes under your medieval outer clothing, producing visual distortions that mark you as someone wearing costume rather than authentic period dress. Medieval courtiers had trained eyes that could detect these subtle but significant differences in body shaping and movement patterns. The fabric care and maintenance of medieval court clothing required specialized knowledge that you simply don't possess. These garments needed specific types of cleaning, storage, and repair that followed techniques passed down through generations of skilled craftspeople. The way clothing aged, developed wear patterns, and acquired the subtle signs of proper use all contributed to the overall authenticity that court fashion demanded. Your pristine modern reproductions lack the patina of authentic use that genuine medieval garments would display. They're too new, too perfect, and too obviously manufactured using contemporary techniques. Medieval courtiers would have immediately recognized these signs of artificial aging and modern construction methods. The seasonal and weather considerations add yet another layer of complexity to medieval court dress. These weren't just aesthetic choices, they were practical responses to the realities of living in drafty stone buildings with limited heating systems. Medieval courtiers understood how to layer garments for warmth while maintaining the visual requirements that court protocol demanded. Your modern understanding of temperature control and indoor climate management leaves you unprepared for the physical realities of medieval court life. You're either uncomfortably cold in garments designed for different heating systems, or inappropriately warm in clothing that assumes environmental conditions that no longer exist. The storage and transport of medieval court clothing required its own specialized knowledge and equipment. These garments couldn't simply be hung in modern closets or packed in contemporary luggage. They needed specific types of containers, particular folding techniques, and careful attention to preventing damage during travel between residences. Historians still argue whether the elaborate medieval wardrobe management systems were primarily practical necessities or additional opportunities for displaying wealth and status through the employment of skilled personal servants. The answer probably includes elements of both motivations, creating yet another aspect of court life that required resources and knowledge you don't possess. As you stand in the Great Hall, surrounded by people whose clothing tells stories you can't read, wearing garments that broadcast your ignorance to anyone paying attention, you begin to realize that the dress code challenges of medieval court life extend far beyond simply looking the part. You're participating in a complex communication system that operates according to rules you're only beginning to glimpse, using a visual language that requires years of study to master. The breakfast protocols are about to begin, and your clothing has already told everyone in the room more about you than you intended to reveal. The conversations that follow will only compound these initial impressions, as experienced courtiers test your knowledge and probe for the cultural fluency that authentic court dress was supposed to demonstrate. You adjust your cloak nervously, inadvertently creating another social signal that you're completely unaware of, and prepare to face the next challenge in your increasingly disastrous day at medieval court. The Great Hall stretches before you like a gauntlet of gastronomic warfare, where every bite you take will be scrutinized, every gesture analyzed, and every dietary choice dissected for clues about your true social origins. Medieval breakfast wasn't just a meal, it was a carefully orchestrated political theater where the ability to navigate complex food hierarchies separated the genuinely noble from the desperately ambitious pretenders like yourself. You follow the other courtiers toward the massive oak tables, their movements flowing with the practiced ease of people who've been participating in these rituals since childhood. The seating arrangements alone present an immediate crisis that you're completely unprepared to handle. Medieval courts operated according to precise hierarchical systems that determined not just where you sat, but what you ate, how much you could consume, and even the order in which different dishes were presented to you. The high table dominates the far end of the hall, elevated on a wooden platform that literally and symbolically placed the most important courtiers above everyone else. But the remaining tables follow a complex arrangement that reflects dozens of subtle social distinctions that you have absolutely no hope of decoding. The distance from the high table, the orientation of the benches, even the quality of the tablecloths all communicate specific information about status and favor that experienced courtiers navigate instinctively. Your first mistake is hesitating. In medieval court culture, uncertainty was almost as damaging as outright presumption. Stand too long scanning the room for clues, and you signal to everyone present that you don't understand the basic social architecture that governs their daily lives. Every moment of confusion broadcasts your outsider status more clearly than if you wore a sign announcing your ignorance. But rushing toward any available seat could prove equally disastrous. Medieval seating protocols weren't just about personal rank, they reflected complex webs of family relationships, political alliances, military obligations, and economic dependencies that stretched back generations. Sit in the wrong place, and you might inadvertently claim relationships that don't exist or suggest loyalties that could prove dangerous in the intricate world of court politics. The food itself presents challenges that would have overwhelmed even experienced medieval diners. Medieval court cuisine operated according to principles that seem completely alien to modern sensibilities, combining ingredients in ways that often prioritized symbolic meaning over flavor, and following preparation techniques designed to display wealth and sophistication rather than nutritional value or practical convenience. The bread alone tells elaborate stories about status and access that you're completely unequipped to decode. Medieval courts served multiple types of bread, each carrying specific social implications. The finest white bread, made from carefully sifted wheat flour, was reserved for the highest nobility. Slightly coarser varieties were distributed according to precise hierarchical calculations. The quality of bread you were offered immediately communicated your perceived social position to everyone at your table. But accepting the wrong type of bread could create problems that extended far beyond simple embarrassment. Medieval social protocols required that you consume foods appropriate to your claimed status. Take bread that's too fine for your supposed rank, and you reveal either ignorance of proper etiquette or dangerous social ambitions. Accept bread that's beneath your claimed position, and you signal either false modesty or, worse, that your noble pretensions are exactly that, pretensions. The ale and wine situation adds another layer of complexity that's making your head spin before you've even had your first sip. Medieval courts served alcoholic beverages according to intricate systems that reflected not just social rank but regional loyalties, family traditions, and current political relationships. The type of wine you were offered could indicate how the court hierarchy viewed your family's historical allegiances, while the quality of ale might suggest their assessment of your current economic prospects. Medieval brewing and winemaking produced beverages that bore little resemblance to their modern counterparts. The alcohol content was often lower but more variable. The flavors included ingredients that contemporary palates would find strange or unpleasant, and the overall effect could range from mildly intoxicating to genuinely dangerous depending on production methods and storage conditions that varied dramatically from one establishment to another. Your modern digestive system is completely unprepared for medieval court beverages. The yeast strains were different. The fermentation processes followed traditional methods that produced unique chemical compounds, and the storage techniques often resulted in flavor profiles that included notes of oak, leather, herbs, and sometimes less pleasant elements that reflected the realities of medieval food preservation. The meat courses present their own gauntlet of social and practical challenges. Medieval court dining featured elaborate presentations of various animals, prepared using techniques designed to showcase both the kitchen skill and the host's resources, but the types of meat served, the cuts offered to different diners, and even the cooking methods employed all carried specific social meanings that you're completely ignorant of. Game meats were particularly loaded with symbolic significance. Venison could only be legally hunted by individuals who held specific royal licenses, making its presence on your plate a statement about your family's relationship with the crown. Wild boar suggested military prowess and noble hunting traditions. Various types of birds carried their own hierarchical implications, with some species reserved for the highest nobility and others distributed according to complex calculations of rank and favor. The portion sizes and serving orders followed mathematical precision that reflected court protocol with almost scientific accuracy. Medieval dining wasn't a casual affair where people served themselves according to appetite and preference. Instead, it was a carefully choreographed performance where every element was calculated to reinforce social hierarchies and political relationships. Your modern eating habits immediately mark you as an outsider in ways that go far beyond simple table manners. The pace at which you consume food, the order in which you approach different dishes, even the way you hold utensils all communicate information about your background and education that experienced courtiers can read like an open book. Medieval dining utensils were themselves markers of social status and cultural sophistication. The quality of your knife, the presence or absence of specialized serving implements, even the materials used in their construction all contributed to the overall assessment that other diners were making about your social position and cultural background. But here's where things get particularly treacherous. Medieval court dining included elaborate rituals of food sharing that operated according to rules you don't understand. Offering portions to other diners, accepting food from their plates, and participating in communal dishes all followed protocols that reflected and reinforced political relationships and social alliances. Share food inappropriately, and you might accidentally suggest romantic interests, political loyalties, or family connections that don't exist. Refuse offered portions, and you could insult people whose enmity might prove dangerous. Accept the wrong dishes from the wrong people, and you might find yourself inadvertently aligned with factions whose goals contradict your own interests or safety. The conversation that accompanies medieval court dining presents yet another minefield that you're stumbling through with increasing desperation. Medieval courtiers didn't just eat together, they conducted elaborate verbal negotiations that shaped tomorrow's political landscape while discussing seemingly innocent topics like weather, hunting, and family news. Every casual comment carries multiple layers of meaning that you're completely missing. That innocent question about your family's estates is actually a probing inquiry about your economic resources and political vulnerabilities. The friendly discussion of recent weather patterns includes coded references to military movements and agricultural conditions that could affect trade relationships and regional alliances. Your responses to these conversational gambits reveal more about your background than you realize. Medieval courtiers were trained from childhood to encode and decode information in seemingly casual social interactions. They could extract remarkable amounts of intelligence from brief exchanges while simultaneously testing the cultural fluency and political awareness of newcomers like yourself. The dining rhythm itself follows patterns that reflect medieval court culture's emphasis on ceremony and social display over efficiency or personal convenience. Meals could stretch for hours, with multiple courses interrupted by entertainment, speeches, and elaborate rituals that served political and social functions rather than nutritional ones. Your modern eating pace and attention span are completely inadequate for these extended dining performances. You're fidgeting with boredom during ceremonial presentations that other diners are analyzing for political significance. You're missing crucial social cues while focusing on practical concerns like whether the meat is properly cooked or whether the vegetables are safe to consume. The entertainment interludes present their own challenges as musicians, storytellers, and performers provide programming that includes coded political commentary and social satire that goes completely over your head. Medieval court entertainers weren't just providing amusing diversions. They were offering sophisticated political analysis disguised as jokes, songs, and dramatic presentations. Your failure to laugh at the right moments, applaud appropriate performances, or show proper appreciation for subtle artistic achievements marks you as someone who doesn't understand the cultural references and political contexts that make these entertainments meaningful to their intended audience. The cleanup and departure protocols add final insults to your already bruised social standing. Medieval court dining concluded with elaborate rituals that reflected the same hierarchical principles that governed the meal's beginning and middle portions. The order of departure, the methods of expressing gratitude, and the social interactions that occurred during the transition to other activities all followed rules that you're completely unaware of. Your modern impulse to help clear dishes or express appreciation in direct, straightforward terms violates protocols that govern interactions between different social classes. Medieval courts operated according to rigid systems that defined appropriate behavior for various ranks, and your egalitarian instincts immediately identify you as someone who doesn't understand the fundamental principles that organize this society. As you finally escape the Great Hall, your stomach churning from unfamiliar foods and your head spinning from the complexity of social protocols you failed to navigate successfully, you realize that medieval court breakfast was essentially an elaborate examination that you failed spectacularly. Every bite revealed your ignorance. Every conversation exposed your cultural inadequacy, and every social interaction broadcasted your outsider status to a room full of people whose lives depended on their ability to read exactly these kinds of signals. The morning is still young, but you've already established a reputation that will follow you through the remaining challenges of your disastrous day at medieval court. Remember that awkward moment when you tried to share bread with someone 3 ranks above your station? The other courtiers certainly will. The corridors echo with the musical cadence of medieval French, Latin phrases that slide off tongues like silk, and regional dialects that carry the weight of centuries-old political allegiances. You step into this linguistic labyrinth with the confidence of someone who thinks they understand medieval communication, completely unaware that you're about to be exposed as a fraud with every syllable that escapes your lips. Medieval court language wasn't just about vocabulary and grammar, it was a sophisticated encoding system that packed layers of social, political, and cultural information into every conversation. The way you pronounced certain words immediately revealed your regional origins, family background, educational level, and current political loyalties to anyone trained to decode these vocal signatures. And everyone at court was trained to decode them. Your first linguistic disaster strikes before you've even finished your morning greetings. Medieval pronunciation followed patterns that had evolved over centuries of regional development, class distinction, and international influence. The Latin that educated courtiers sprinkled throughout their conversations wasn't the sanitized church Latin you might have studied. It was a living language that carried regional accents, class markers, and scholarly traditions that varied dramatically between different educational institutions and geographical areas. That elegant salve you confidently offer to a passing nobleman immediately marks you as someone who learned Latin from books rather than from childhood immersion in court culture. Your pronunciation lacks the subtle regional inflections that would identify your supposed family's traditional territories. The rhythm and stress patterns reveal a modern understanding of Latin phonetics rather than the authentic medieval approach that combined classical education with vernacular linguistic influences. But the vernacular languages present even greater challenges that you're completely unprepared to navigate. Medieval courts operated as polyglot environments where educated individuals seamlessly switched between Norman French, Anglo-Saxon English, Church Latin, and various regional dialects depending on their audience, topic, and social objectives. The choice of language itself carried political implications that could make or break diplomatic relationships. Speaking French in certain contexts demonstrated your family's Norman connections and suggested political loyalties that traced back to the conquest. Using Anglo-Saxon English indicated different historical allegiances and social orientations. Latin showed classical education and ecclesiastical connections. Regional dialects revealed local loyalties and economic relationships that could prove crucial in trade negotiations and military alliances. Your modern linguistic abilities, however impressive they might seem in contemporary academic settings, completely fail to capture the authentic medieval approach to multilingual communication. Medieval courtiers didn't just speak multiple languages, they inhabited them, switching linguistic codes as naturally as they changed clothing to suit different social occasions. The vocabulary itself operates according to principles that seem designed to trip up unsuspecting outsiders like yourself. Medieval courts developed elaborate systems of euphemism, metaphor, and coded reference that allowed participants to discuss sensitive political topics without explicitly stating positions that might prove dangerous if overheard by the wrong people. A casual conversation about hunting might actually be a detailed discussion of military strategy. Comments about agricultural conditions could encode intelligence about regional economic vulnerabilities. Family genealogy discussions often served as coded negotiations about marriage alliances and inheritance rights. Weather observations frequently carried coded messages about the timing of political actions or military movements. Your literal interpretation of these conversations marks you as someone who doesn't understand the sophisticated communication protocols that govern court discourse. While you're focused on the surface meanings of words and phrases, experienced courtiers are conducting elaborate negotiations and information exchanges that operate on multiple levels simultaneously. The pronunciation pitfalls multiply exponentially when you encounter personal names and titles that carry specific historical and political significance. Medieval naming conventions reflected complex family relationships, regional loyalties, religious devotions, and political allegiances that could stretch back generations. Mispronounce someone's name, and you might accidentally suggest ignorance of their family's historical achievements or, worse, deliberate disrespect for their ancestral traditions. But medieval titles present even greater challenges because they often combined multiple linguistic traditions in ways that reflected the complex political evolution of medieval European society. A single individual might hold Norman French titles, Anglo-Saxon land grants, and Latin ecclesiastical positions that required different pronunciation patterns and suggested different types of authority and social relationships. Your modern approach to medieval titles treats them as static labels rather than dynamic political tools that medieval courtiers used to navigate complex social situations. The way you address someone doesn't just show respect, it indicates your understanding of their current political position, your assessment of their family's historical significance, and your own social aspirations and political loyalties. The grammar and syntax of medieval court language followed patterns that had evolved to serve specific social and political functions rather than abstract linguistic principles. Sentence structures, word orders, and grammatical constructions all carried information about the speaker's social background, educational experience, and current political positions. Medieval educated classes used grammatical complexity as a marker of social sophistication and intellectual achievement. The ability to construct elaborate sentences that demonstrated mastery of classical rhetoric, contemporary poetic traditions, and regional linguistic variations marked someone as a member of the cultural elite worthy of serious political consideration. Your simplified modern approach to medieval syntax immediately identifies you as someone who learned the language from books rather than from childhood immersion in authentic court culture. Even when your vocabulary and pronunciation are technically correct, your grammatical patterns betray your contemporary educational background and mark you as an outsider attempting to infiltrate a social system that you don't truly understand. The regional accent situation adds another layer of complexity that's making your linguistic performance increasingly disastrous. Medieval courtiers could identify someone's geographical origins, family background, and travel experience from subtle variations in pronunciation, vocabulary choice, and grammatical patterns that reflected the specific linguistic environments where they had learned to speak. These weren't just interesting curiosities, they were crucial intelligence that could determine political allegiances, economic relationships, and military loyalties that might prove relevant in court negotiations and social alliances. A courtier who spoke with Yorkshire inflections might be assumed to have specific political loyalties and economic interests that differed from someone whose accent reflected Welsh borderland influences. Your lack of authentic regional accent immediately raises questions about your claimed family background and geographical origins. Medieval courtiers expect linguistic consistency that reflects genuine biographical details, and your modern attempt to adopt generic medieval speech patterns creates contradictions that experienced listeners notice immediately. The religious language components of medieval court discourse present their own specialized challenges that require deep understanding of contemporary theological debates, ecclesiastical politics, and spiritual traditions that influence daily court life. Medieval education was fundamentally religious in orientation, and courtiers were expected to demonstrate sophisticated understanding of biblical references, patristic writings, and contemporary theological developments. Religious quotations weren't just pious decorations, they were coded political statements that indicated the speaker's position on contemporary ecclesiastical controversies, their relationships with various religious orders, and their understanding of the complex interactions between spiritual and temporal authority that shaped medieval political culture. Your modern religious education, however comprehensive it might be, lacks the specific medieval context that gave these references their contemporary political meaning. You might recognize biblical quotations and understand their theological significance, but you miss the coded political messages that medieval audiences would have decoded automatically. The courtly love language traditions add yet another dimension of complexity that you're completely unprepared to navigate. Medieval courts developed elaborate literary and linguistic traditions that combined romantic poetry, political allegory, and social commentary in sophisticated artistic expressions that served multiple cultural functions simultaneously. Understanding courtly love discourse required familiarity with specific poetic traditions, mythological references, and allegorical systems that medieval educated classes used to discuss politics, romance, and social relationships in ways that were both artistically sophisticated and politically safe. Your modern romantic sensibilities and contemporary literary education leave you completely unable to decode the complex messages that courtly love language carried in medieval social contexts. What sounds like simple romantic poetry to your modern ears might actually be elaborate political commentary or sophisticated social criticism disguised as love songs. The scholarly Latin interjections that educated courtiers sprinkled throughout their conversations present another ongoing challenge that reveals your inadequate educational background. Medieval scholars didn't just quote classical authors, they referenced specific textual traditions, commented on contemporary academic debates, and demonstrated familiarity with recent intellectual developments that shaped educated discourse throughout medieval Europe. These scholarly references weren't showing off, they were essential tools for political and social communication that allowed educated courtiers to discuss complex ideas while demonstrating their intellectual credentials and cultural sophistication to audiences who shared similar educational backgrounds. Your modern Latin education, however thorough it might be in terms of grammar and classical literature, lacks the specific medieval context that made these scholarly references meaningful and politically relevant to contemporary audiences. You might understand the literal meaning of Latin quotations, but you miss the contemporary academic and political implications that medieval listeners would have recognized immediately. Historians still argue whether the complexity of medieval court language represented genuine cultural sophistication or elaborate social exclusion mechanisms designed to prevent social mobility and maintain aristocratic privilege. The answer probably includes elements of both motivations, creating linguistic barriers that served multiple social and political functions simultaneously. As conversations swirl around you in languages that sound familiar but carry meanings you can't fully grasp, you begin to realize that medieval court communication operates according to principles that extend far beyond simple vocabulary and pronunciation. Every linguistic choice carries political implications. Every accent reveals biographical information, and every grammatical pattern communicates social messages that you're completely failing to decode or control. The afternoon activities are approaching, and your morning's linguistic disasters have already established your reputation as someone who doesn't understand the fundamental communication systems that govern medieval court life. Remember that embarrassing moment when you mispronounced the Duke's territorial title and accidentally suggested his family had questionable claims to their ancestral lands? Everyone else certainly remembers, and they'll be watching to see what other cultural inadequacies your speech patterns reveal as the day progresses. Your tongue feels thick and clumsy in your mouth as you prepare to face the next challenge in your increasingly catastrophic medieval court experience. The chapel bells begin their haunting call across the castle courtyard, and you feel your stomach sink as you realize that medieval court life operates according to a religious rhythm that will test every assumption you've ever made about faith, politics, and personal privacy. The medieval church wasn't just a spiritual institution, it was the central nervous system of court culture. And your survival depends entirely on navigating religious obligations that seamlessly blend genuine devotion with sophisticated political theater. You follow the stream of courtiers flowing toward the chapel, their movements reflecting the practiced synchronization of people who've been participating in these rituals since childhood. But this isn't just about showing up and looking pious. Medieval religious observance at court level operated according to complex protocols that tested your theological knowledge, political awareness, and social sophistication with every prayer, every genuflection, and every moment of supposedly private devotion. The chapel itself overwhelms you with sensory complexity that goes far beyond simple architectural grandeur. Medieval court chapels were designed as multimedia environments where visual art, musical performance, aromatic incense, and ritualized movement combined to create experiences that served political and social functions while addressing genuine spiritual needs. Every element carried encoded messages about royal authority, family relationships, and contemporary political dynamics that experienced courtiers decoded while maintaining appearances of focused religious devotion. Your first challenge arrives before you've even entered the sacred space. The holy water ritual that greets every participant requires knowledge of proper protocols that immediately reveal your cultural background and religious education. The way you approach the font, the gestures you make while blessing yourself, even the pace and rhythm of your movements all communicate information about your family's religious traditions and your personal relationship with ecclesiastical authority. Medieval holy water wasn't just symbolic, it was consecrated according to specific liturgical traditions that varied between different religious orders and regional practices. The blessing formulas, the timing of consecration, and the ritual procedures used to maintain the water's sacred properties all followed traditions that reflected complex theological debates and ecclesiastical politics that shaped contemporary religious culture. Your modern Catholic or Protestant background, however devout it might be, completely fails to prepare you for the specific medieval approach to sacramental practice that combines folk tradition, classical theology, and contemporary political considerations in ways that seem almost alien to contemporary religious sensibilities. The seating arrangements within the chapel follow the same hierarchical principles that govern every other aspect of court life, but with additional complexity introduced by religious rank, family burial rites, and ecclesiastical relationships that operate according to different principles than purely secular social hierarchies. Your position during religious services immediately communicates your family's historical relationship with the church, your personal spiritual status, and your current standing in the complex networks of religious and political authority that govern medieval court culture. But finding your proper place requires knowledge of family histories, ecclesiastical traditions, and contemporary religious politics that you simply don't possess. Medieval chapel seating reflected generations of accumulated privilege, religious devotion, and political service that created spatial arrangements as complex and meaningful as any secular court protocol. The liturgical calendar that governs medieval religious observance operates according to principles that seem designed to confuse and exhaust anyone not raised within its rhythms. Medieval courts celebrated dozens of feast days, fast periods, and special observances that required specific types of participation, particular forms of prayer, and elaborate ceremonial behaviors that changed throughout the liturgical year. Your modern understanding of religious holidays and seasonal observances bears little resemblance to the intensive medieval approach to liturgical time that integrated religious practice with agricultural cycles, political celebrations, and social traditions in ways that created almost constant ceremonial obligations for court participants. The daily prayer cycle alone presents challenges that would overwhelm even dedicated modern religious practitioners. Medieval courts observed the canonical hours lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline, each requiring specific prayers, particular postures, and elaborate ritual behaviors that tested participants' stamina, memory, and spiritual dedication throughout every single day. These weren't brief, casual observances that people could sleepwalk through while thinking about other concerns. Medieval liturgical practice demanded focused attention, sophisticated theological understanding, and physical endurance that reflected the central role of religious observance in medieval court culture and political life. Your modern attention span and contemporary approach to religious practice leave you completely unprepared for the intensive medieval approach to daily prayer that treats spiritual observance as serious intellectual and physical work, rather than brief moments of casual reflection or social obligation. The Latin liturgy presents its own specialized challenges that go far beyond simple translation difficulties. Medieval liturgical Latin wasn't just church language, it was a sophisticated cultural system that encoded theological debates, political allegiances, and social relationships in prayers, chants, and ceremonial formulas that carried multiple layers of meaning for educated participants. Understanding liturgical Latin required familiarity with patristic writings, contemporary theological developments, and classical rhetorical traditions that medieval educated classes used to navigate complex relationships between spiritual authority and temporal power. The prayers themselves often included coded political messages and sophisticated theological arguments disguised as devotional expressions. Your modern Latin education, however thorough it might be in terms of classical literature and grammar, lacks the specific medieval liturgical context that made these religious formulas meaningful and politically relevant to contemporary audiences. You might be able to follow the literal meaning of prayers and chants, but you miss the encoded political and theological messages that medieval participants decoded while maintaining appearances of focused spiritual devotion. The music adds another layer of complexity that reveals your cultural inadequacy in ways that extend far beyond simple inability to carry a tune. Medieval liturgical music operated according to sophisticated theoretical systems that combined mathematical principles, theological symbolism, and aesthetic traditions in musical expressions that served spiritual, intellectual, and political functions simultaneously. Gregorian chant wasn't just pretty singing, it was a complex cultural technology that encoded theological knowledge, demonstrated intellectual sophistication, and created communal experiences that reinforced social hierarchies while addressing genuine spiritual needs. Participating effectively required years of musical education that combined practical performance skills with theoretical understanding and cultural knowledge that shaped every aspect of medieval intellectual life. Your modern musical background, however sophisticated it might be in contemporary terms, provides no preparation for the specific medieval approach to liturgical music that treats singing as serious intellectual work rather than emotional expression or artistic performance. The confessional requirements add yet another dimension of challenge that tests your ability to navigate the complex relationships between personal spirituality and political survival that characterized medieval court culture. Medieval confession wasn't just private spiritual practice, it was a sophisticated information management system that required careful balance between genuine spiritual honesty and political discretion. Medieval court confessors often served multiple roles as spiritual advisors, political counselors, and intelligence gatherers whose relationships with penitents involved complex considerations of spiritual authority, political loyalty, and personal survival that went far beyond simple religious obligation. Participating in medieval confessional practice required sophisticated understanding of contemporary theological debates about sin, penance, and spiritual authority that shaped the practical procedures and political implications of sacramental confession in court environments where personal spirituality intersected with political survival in ways that could prove literally life-threatening. The religious art and symbolism that decorates medieval court chapels operates according to iconographic systems that require extensive cultural education to decode properly. Medieval religious art wasn't just decoration, it was a sophisticated communication system that encoded theological arguments, political messages, and cultural knowledge in visual symbols that educated viewers read like illustrated textbooks. Understanding chapel iconography required familiarity with biblical narratives, patristic traditions, contemporary theological debates, and classical allegorical systems that medieval educated classes used to discuss complex spiritual and political concepts through visual rather than verbal communication. Your modern art appreciation and contemporary religious education provide no preparation for the specific medieval approach to religious symbolism that treats visual art as serious intellectual communication rather than aesthetic decoration or emotional inspiration. The saints' feast days and their associated observances create an almost constant cycle of religious obligations that require specific knowledge of hagiographic traditions, liturgical practices, and cultural customs that varied between different regions and religious orders throughout medieval Europe. Medieval saints weren't just spiritual role models, they were political symbols whose feast days provided opportunities for coded political communication, family celebration, and regional identification that served social and political functions while addressing genuine spiritual needs. Participating effectively in Saints' Day observances required detailed knowledge of hagiographic literature, regional traditions, and contemporary religious politics that shaped the practical procedures and social implications of devotional practice in court environments where religious observance intersected with political survival and social advancement. The pilgrimage traditions and their associated spiritual obligations add another layer of complexity that reveals the inadequacy of your modern religious understanding for authentic medieval court participation. Medieval pilgrimage wasn't just spiritual tourism, it was a sophisticated cultural system that combined genuine religious devotion with political networking, economic activity, and social advancement in ways that created opportunities and obligations that shaped court careers and family fortunes. Understanding pilgrimage culture required knowledge of geographical routes, religious traditions, political relationships, and economic systems that connected medieval courts with international networks of spiritual, cultural, and political exchange that extended throughout medieval Europe and beyond. Historians still argue whether medieval court religious observance represented genuine spiritual devotion or elaborate social control mechanisms designed to reinforce political hierarchies and maintain aristocratic authority through religious institutions. The answer probably includes elements of both motivations, creating religious obligations that served multiple spiritual, social, and political functions simultaneously. As you struggle through your first medieval court religious service, your unfamiliarity with liturgical procedures, theological concepts, and cultural traditions becomes increasingly obvious to participants whose lives have been shaped by intensive religious education and daily spiritual practice that treats faith as serious intellectual and political work rather than private personal belief. The afternoon entertainment awaits, but your morning's religious inadequacies have already established your reputation as someone who doesn't understand the fundamental spiritual systems that govern medieval court culture. Remember that awkward moment when you genuflected at the wrong time and accidentally suggested theological ignorance that marked you as someone with questionable religious education? The other courtiers are still watching to see what other spiritual and cultural deficiencies your behavior will reveal. The afternoon sun streams through the great hall's windows as servants begin arranging spaces for entertainment that will determine your social fate with the finality of a medieval trial by combat. You watch other courtiers preparing for activities that seem deceptively familiar: music, dancing, games, and storytelling, completely unaware that you're about to enter a performance arena where artistic skill, cultural knowledge, and social sophistication will be tested with the ruthless precision of a university examination conducted in front of a hostile audience. Medieval court entertainment wasn't just leisure activity designed to pass pleasant hours. It was a sophisticated evaluation system that tested participants' education, cultural refinement, political awareness, and social connections through seemingly casual artistic activities that carried profound implications for career advancement and social survival. Every song you attempt, every dance step you take, and every game you play will be analyzed for clues about your background, abilities, and worthiness to remain in this rarefied social environment. The musical requirements alone present challenges that would overwhelm professional contemporary musicians. Medieval court music operated according to theoretical systems that combined mathematical principles, theological symbolism, and aesthetic traditions in artistic expressions that demanded years of specialized education to understand, let alone perform competently. You're not just expected to carry a tune, you're expected to demonstrate mastery of complex musical modes, intricate rhythmic patterns, and sophisticated harmonic relationships that reflected the cutting-edge intellectual developments of medieval musical theory. The instruments themselves require specialized knowledge that extends far beyond simple performance technique. Medieval court musicians didn't just play music, they understood the cultural significance of different instrumental traditions, the social implications of various musical forms, and the political messages that could be encoded in seemingly innocent melodies and rhythms. That elegant lute resting near the window represents hours of specialized training that combined practical performance skills with theoretical knowledge and cultural sophistication that marked educated courtiers as members of an intellectual elite worthy of serious political consideration. The way you hold the instrument, the techniques you use to produce sound, even your posture while playing all communicate information about your musical education and cultural background that experienced listeners decode immediately. Your modern musical abilities, however impressive they might seem in contemporary settings, completely fail to capture the authentic medieval approach to musical performance that treated music making as serious intellectual work rather than emotional expression or entertainment. Medieval musicians were expected to understand the mathematical relationships that governed harmonic intervals, the theological symbolism that gave different modes their spiritual significance, and the cultural traditions that connected musical performance with political and social communication. The dance requirements add another layer of complexity that tests your physical coordination, cultural knowledge, and social awareness simultaneously. Medieval court dancing wasn't just rhythmic movement, it was a sophisticated social ritual that encoded political relationships, family connections, and cultural allegiances in choreographed performances that served diplomatic and educational functions while providing genuine entertainment. Every dance carried specific social meanings that reflected contemporary political relationships and cultural values. The steps themselves told stories about military traditions, agricultural cycles, religious festivals, and family histories that connected participants with broader cultural narratives that shaped medieval social identity and political consciousness. Your modern dance experience provides absolutely no preparation for the specific medieval approach to choreographed movement that treats dancing as sophisticated cultural communication rather than individual artistic expression or casual social activity. Medieval court dances required precise knowledge of traditional steps, sophisticated understanding of musical relationships, and careful attention to social protocols that governed partner selection and performance order according to complex hierarchical calculations. The partner selection process alone reveals social dynamics that you're completely unprepared to navigate. Medieval court dancing involved elaborate negotiations about rank, family relationships, political alliances, and romantic possibilities that made partner choice a delicate diplomatic challenge that could enhance or destroy social prospects depending on the cultural sophistication and political awareness that participants brought to these seemingly casual interactions. Choose the wrong partner, and you might accidentally suggest romantic interests that contradict existing marriage negotiations, political loyalties that conflict with your supposed family background, or social aspirations that reveal dangerous ambitions or embarrassing ignorance about contemporary court dynamics. The storytelling traditions present their own specialized challenges that require extensive knowledge of literary traditions, historical narratives, and cultural references that medieval educated classes used to discuss contemporary political and social issues through allegorical and metaphorical discourse that served multiple entertainment and educational functions simultaneously. Medieval court storytelling wasn't just amusing narrative, it was sophisticated political commentary that allowed participants to discuss sensitive topics through fictional frameworks that provided safety from direct political criticism, while demonstrating cultural knowledge and intellectual sophistication that marked speakers as worthy of serious consideration for advancement and alliance. Understanding medieval narrative traditions required familiarity with classical literature, contemporary historical events, regional folklore, and religious allegory that medieval storytellers combined in sophisticated artistic expressions that entertained audiences while educating them about political, social, and spiritual concepts that shaped contemporary culture and consciousness. Your modern literary background, however extensive it might be in terms of contemporary fiction and classical texts, lacks the specific medieval context that made these narrative performances meaningful and politically relevant to contemporary audiences. You might recognize some classical references and understand basic story structures, but you miss the encoded political messages and cultural allusions that medieval audiences decoded while enjoying the surface entertainment. The gaming culture adds yet another dimension of complexity that reveals your inadequacy in ways that extend far beyond simple inability to win contests. Medieval court games operated according to principles that combine chance, skill, and strategic thinking in competitive activities that tested participants' intelligence, cultural knowledge, and social sophistication while providing opportunities for political networking and alliance building. Chess wasn't just a board game, it was a sophisticated military simulation that allowed players to demonstrate strategic thinking, political understanding, and intellectual sophistication while engaging in competitive activities that could enhance or damage social reputations depending on performance quality and cultural awareness. But medieval chess followed rules and strategic principles that differed significantly from modern versions, using peace movements and victory conditions that reflected contemporary military tactics and political relationships rather than abstract game theory. Playing effectively required understanding of medieval warfare, political strategy, and cultural symbolism that informed game mechanics and competitive protocols. Your modern gaming experience provides no preparation for the specific medieval approach to competitive activities that treated games as serious intellectual challenges rather than casual entertainment or simple skill testing. Medieval court games required extensive cultural knowledge, sophisticated strategic thinking, and careful attention to social protocols that governed competition, winning, and losing according to principles that reflected broader cultural values and political relationships. The poetry recitation requirements add another layer of challenge that tests your literary knowledge, performance skills, and cultural understanding simultaneously. Medieval court poetry wasn't just artistic expression, it was sophisticated cultural communication that encoded political messages, social commentary, and intellectual arguments in artistic forms that entertained audiences while demonstrating speakers' education and cultural sophistication. Courtly poetry traditions required familiarity with classical literary forms, contemporary poetic developments, regional linguistic variations, and cultural references that medieval educated classes used to discuss complex political and social concepts through artistic rather than direct discourse. The poems themselves often included coded political messages and sophisticated intellectual arguments disguised as entertainment. Your modern poetry appreciation and contemporary literary education leave you completely unable to decode the complex cultural and political messages that medieval courtly poetry carried in court settings where artistic performance intersected with political communication and social advancement in ways that could prove crucial for career development and personal survival. The musical improvisation expectations present challenges that go far beyond simple creative ability. Medieval court musicians were expected to create spontaneous compositions that demonstrated mastery of complex theoretical systems while responding to social cues, political developments, and cultural contexts that shaped the appropriateness and effectiveness of different musical choices in real-time performance situations. Improvising effectively required not just musical skill but sophisticated understanding of contemporary politics, cultural knowledge, and social awareness that allowed musicians to create compositions that entertained audiences while avoiding political missteps and cultural errors that could prove personally and professionally devastating. The intellectual discourse that accompanies medieval court entertainment creates ongoing challenges that test your ability to participate in sophisticated conversations about artistic, political, and cultural topics while maintaining appearances of focused attention to performance activities. Medieval courtiers didn't just watch entertainment, they analyzed it for political significance, cultural meaning, and artistic merit while conducting elaborate social negotiations and information exchanges. These conversations required extensive education, sophisticated cultural knowledge, and careful political awareness that allowed participants to discuss complex topics while avoiding controversial positions and dangerous associations that could prove personally and politically hazardous in court environments where entertainment intersected with serious political and social communication. Historians still argue whether the complexity of medieval court entertainment represented genuine cultural sophistication or elaborate social exclusion mechanisms designed to prevent social mobility and maintain aristocratic privilege through artistic and intellectual barriers. The answer probably includes elements of both motivations, creating entertainment traditions that served multiple cultural, social, and political functions simultaneously. As you struggle through your first medieval court entertainment session, your lack of musical training, dancing experience, literary knowledge, and cultural sophistication becomes increasingly obvious to participants whose lives have been shaped by intensive artistic education and daily cultural practice that treats entertainment as serious intellectual and social work rather than casual leisure activity. The evening feast approaches, but your afternoon's artistic disasters have already established your reputation as someone who doesn't understand the fundamental cultural systems that govern medieval court entertainment. Remember that embarrassing moment when you attempted to join a musical performance and accidentally revealed your complete ignorance of medieval musical theory? The other courtiers are still discussing your cultural inadequacies and wondering what other deficiencies your evening behavior will reveal. The evening shadows deepen across the great hall as servants light countless candles and torches, transforming the space into a flickering theater of golden light where the day's most crucial social and political dramas will unfold over multiple courses of elaborate cuisine. You approach the evening feast with growing dread, having already demonstrated your inadequacy in every other aspect of medieval court life, completely unaware that dinner represents the ultimate examination where all your previous failures will converge into a final, devastating assessment of your fitness for this rarefied social environment. Medieval court dinners weren't just meals, they were sophisticated diplomatic conferences where the future of kingdoms could be decided between the fish course and the roasted meats, where marriage alliances were negotiated over wine and honeyed cakes, and where political careers were made or destroyed through subtle conversational maneuvers that operated according to protocols more complex than modern international treaties. The seating arrangements alone present a puzzle that would challenge professional diplomats. The positioning for evening meals followed even more intricate hierarchical calculations than breakfast protocols, incorporating considerations of family relationships, political alliances, military obligations, marriage negotiations, religious standing, and current royal favor that created spatial arrangements as complex and meaningful as medieval battle formations. Your position at the table immediately communicates the day's assessment of your social value and political potential. Sit too close to important figures, and you reveal presumptions that mark you as dangerously ambitious or embarrassingly ignorant. Sit too far from centers of power, and you signal acceptance of low status that could prove permanently limiting for your court prospects. But finding your appropriate place requires knowledge of contemporary political dynamics, family histories, and social relationships that you've spent the entire day proving you don't possess. Every moment of hesitation broadcasts your confusion to experienced courtiers who navigate these arrangements instinctively, while any decisive movement toward a particular seat might prove catastrophically inappropriate. The service protocols add layers of complexity that transform simple dining into an elaborate performance where every gesture carries social and political implications. Medieval court service followed precise choreographies that reflected the fundamental principles organizing medieval society: hierarchy, reciprocity, honor, and obligation in dining rituals that served educational and political functions while addressing practical nutritional needs. The order in which different dishes are presented to various diners follows mathematical calculations that account for social rank, family relationships, political alliances, and current favor with precision that would impress modern computer programmers. Understanding these serving sequences requires detailed knowledge of court hierarchy and political dynamics that experienced courtiers use to decode messages about changing relationships and shifting power balances. Your modern egalitarian instincts immediately conflict with medieval dining protocols that treat inequality as a fundamental organizing principle rather than a social problem to be solved. The way servants approach different diners, the quality of utensils provided to various participants, even the temperature and presentation of food served to different individuals all communicate specific information about status and relationships that you're completely failing to decode or respond to appropriately. The conversation requirements during medieval court dinners present challenges that would overwhelm professional diplomats and skilled politicians. Medieval courtiers didn't just eat and chat, they conducted elaborate verbal negotiations that shaped tomorrow's political landscape while maintaining appearances of casual social interaction during leisure dining activities. Every topic of conversation carries multiple layers of meaning that experienced participants navigate while appearing to focus on simple social pleasantries. That innocent discussion of agricultural conditions actually encodes detailed intelligence about regional economic vulnerabilities and military supply capabilities. The friendly exchange of family news includes sophisticated negotiations about marriage alliances and inheritance agreements that could affect international relationships and domestic stability. Your literal interpretation of dinner conversation marks you as someone who doesn't understand the sophisticated communication protocols that govern court discourse during formal social events. While you're focused on the surface meanings of seemingly casual comments, experienced courtiers are conducting complex political analyses and diplomatic negotiations that operate according to principles you're completely unaware of. The wine service adds another dimension of complexity that tests your cultural knowledge, political awareness, and social sophistication simultaneously. Medieval court wine service wasn't just beverage distribution, it was a sophisticated ritual that encoded political relationships, economic alliances, and cultural knowledge in ceremonial activities that served diplomatic and educational functions while providing genuine hospitality. The types of wine offered to different diners communicate specific messages about their perceived status, political value, and social prospects. The quality, origin, and vintage of wines served reflect complex calculations about political relationships, economic partnerships, and cultural connections that experienced courtiers decode while maintaining appearances of focused attention to dining activities. Understanding medieval wine culture required extensive knowledge of international trade relationships, agricultural conditions, religious traditions, and cultural preferences that shaped contemporary beverage production and consumption patterns throughout medieval Europe and beyond. The wines themselves carried encoded information about political alliances, economic relationships, and cultural sophistication that influenced court perceptions and social relationships. Your modern wine appreciation, however sophisticated it might be in contemporary terms, provides no preparation for the specific medieval approach to wine service that treats beverage selection as serious political communication rather than personal preference or culinary enhancement. The entertainment interludes that punctuate medieval court dinners create additional challenges that test your ability to maintain appropriate responses to artistic performances while participating in ongoing political conversations and social negotiations. Medieval dinner entertainment wasn't just pleasant diversion, it was sophisticated political commentary that allowed performers to discuss contemporary issues through artistic frameworks that provided safety from direct criticism while demonstrating cultural knowledge and intellectual sophistication. Understanding dinner entertainment required familiarity with classical literary traditions, contemporary political developments, regional cultural variations, and artistic conventions that medieval performers used to encode political messages and social commentary in musical, theatrical, and poetic presentations that entertained audiences while educating them about contemporary issues and cultural values. Your modern entertainment expectations leave you completely unprepared for the intensive medieval approach to dinner performance that treats artistic activities as serious intellectual communication rather than passive consumption of professional entertainment. Medieval courtiers were expected to analyze performances for political significance, cultural meaning, and artistic merit while maintaining active participation in ongoing social and political conversations. The gift exchange traditions that often accompany medieval court dinners add yet another layer of complexity that reveals your ignorance of cultural protocols that govern reciprocity, obligation, and social relationship management in court environments. Medieval gift-giving wasn't just generous hospitality, it was a sophisticated political tool that created obligations, demonstrated resources, and communicated messages about relationships and expectations that shaped contemporary political and social dynamics. Understanding medieval gift culture required knowledge of symbolic traditions, economic values, and political implications that made appropriate gift selection and exchange a complex diplomatic challenge that could enhance or damage social prospects depending on the cultural sophistication and political awareness that participants brought to these seemingly generous interactions. The timing, appropriateness, and symbolic meaning of gifts offered during dinner activities follow protocols that reflect contemporary political relationships and cultural values in ways that experienced courtiers navigate instinctively while appearing to focus on simple social generosity and personal friendship. Your modern approach to gift-giving treats presents as expressions of personal affection or social courtesy, rather than sophisticated political tools that create obligations and communicate messages about relationships, expectations, and future interactions that could prove crucial for career development and personal survival in court environments. The departure protocols that conclude medieval court dinners require knowledge of social hierarchies, political relationships, and cultural traditions that govern the complex procedures for ending formal social events without causing offense or missing opportunities for important private conversations and political networking. The order of departure, the methods of expressing gratitude, the social interactions that occur during the transition from formal dining to evening activities, and the private conversations that develop during departure procedures all follow rules that reflect fundamental principles organizing medieval court culture and political relationships. Understanding departure protocols requires sophisticated awareness of contemporary political dynamics, family relationships, and social obligations that experienced courtiers use to maximize networking opportunities while avoiding social errors and political missteps that could prove personally and professionally devastating. Your modern social instincts provide no guidance for navigating the complex medieval approach to formal event conclusion that treats departure as serious political opportunity rather than simple social courtesy or practical necessity. The private conversations that develop during and after dinner activities present the greatest challenges and opportunities of medieval court social life. These informal interactions often prove more politically significant than formal ceremonies and official meetings, creating opportunities for alliance building, information exchange, and relationship development that could determine career prospects and personal survival in court environments where political relationships determined individual fate. Participating effectively in private court conversations required extensive cultural knowledge, sophisticated political awareness, and careful attention to social protocols that governed informal communication while maintaining appearances of casual friendship and personal interest rather than calculated political networking. Historians still argue whether the complexity of medieval court dining represented genuine cultural sophistication or elaborate social control mechanisms designed to reinforce political hierarchies and maintain aristocratic authority through dining rituals that excluded outsiders while binding insiders through shared cultural experiences and mutual obligations. As you struggle through your first medieval court dinner, your unfamiliarity with dining protocols, conversation requirements, and cultural expectations becomes increasingly obvious to participants whose lives have been shaped by intensive social education and daily political practice that treats dining as serious diplomatic work rather than casual social activity. The nighttime court activities await, but your evening's social disasters have already established your reputation as someone who doesn't understand the fundamental political and cultural systems that govern medieval court dining. Remember that catastrophic moment when you misunderstood a coded political reference and accidentally expressed support for a faction that opposes your supposed family's traditional loyalties? The other courtiers are still analyzing your political ignorance and wondering whether your nighttime behavior will reveal even more dangerous inadequacies. The great hall gradually empties as courtiers drift away in small groups, their movements guided by invisible currents of political necessity and social opportunity that you're completely blind to. The real business of medieval court life begins now, in the shadowy hours after formal dinner, when the day's public performances give way to private negotiations that will determine tomorrow's power structures. You follow the dispersing crowd with growing unease, completely unaware that you're entering the most dangerous phase of medieval court life, the after-hours political arena, where careers are destroyed and alliances forged in whispered conversations that operate according to rules you don't understand. Medieval courts transformed dramatically once the formal dinner concluded and the evening's official ceremonies ended. The carefully choreographed public displays of hierarchy and protocol gave way to fluid, dynamic networks of private conversation where the real political work occurred in intimate settings that allowed for the kind of frank discussion impossible during formal court activities. These weren't casual social gatherings where people relaxed and spoke honestly about their feelings and opinions. Medieval nighttime court activities were intensive political workshops where experienced practitioners conducted the complex negotiations, information exchanges, and relationship building that shaped contemporary political landscapes through sophisticated diplomatic techniques that required years of training to master effectively. Your first challenge emerges immediately as you realize you have absolutely no idea where to go or whom to approach for these crucial evening interactions. Medieval court social geography shifted dramatically after dinner, with different spaces assuming different political significance as various groups claimed territories for specific types of conversation and negotiation. The alcoves near the great fireplace might become gathering spots for military commanders discussing campaign strategies and troop movements. The window seats could transform into informal diplomatic venues where representatives of different regional interests conducted trade negotiations and alliance discussions. The chapel antechamber might serve as neutral ground for sensitive conversations between rivals who needed to maintain public appearances of cooperation while privately negotiating territorial or inheritance disputes. Understanding these shifting social territories required extensive knowledge of contemporary political dynamics, family relationships, and cultural protocols that experienced courtiers navigated instinctively while maintaining appearances of casual social interaction during pleasant evening activities. Your confusion about appropriate evening destinations immediately marks you as someone who doesn't understand the fundamental political geography that organizes medieval court culture. Stand alone too long, and you signal social isolation that could prove permanently damaging. Approach the wrong group, and you might interrupt sensitive negotiations or reveal ignorance about political relationships that could make you unwelcome in future social situations. The conversation topics that dominate evening court discussions operate according to sophisticated codes that allow participants to discuss highly sensitive political information while maintaining plausible deniability if their words are reported to hostile audiences. Medieval courtiers developed elaborate systems of metaphor, allusion, and indirect reference that enabled complex political communication while protecting speakers from the dangerous consequences of direct political criticism or explicit alliance building. That casual discussion of hunting techniques actually encodes detailed military intelligence about enemy troop movements and defensive capabilities. The friendly exchange of agricultural observations includes sophisticated economic analysis about regional food security and taxation potential. The seemingly innocent family genealogy conversations involve complex negotiations about marriage alliances and inheritance rights that could reshape political relationships throughout the kingdom. Your literal interpretation of evening conversations reveals your complete inability to decode the sophisticated political communication that experienced courtiers' conduct while appearing to engage in simple social chat during leisure activities. While you're focusing on surface meanings and trying to contribute relevant comments about actual hunting or farming, experienced participants are conducting elaborate diplomatic negotiations that could determine the outcome of military campaigns and succession disputes. The intelligence gathering that occurs during evening court activities represents one of the most crucial functions of medieval political culture. These informal conversations provide opportunities for collecting information about enemy intentions, ally capabilities, economic conditions, military preparations, and political developments that could prove essential for survival and success in the complex political environments that characterized medieval court life. Medieval courtiers didn't just gossip, they conducted systematic intelligence operations that combined careful observation, strategic questioning, and sophisticated analysis to gather information that could provide crucial advantages in political and military competitions. The seemingly casual questions about your family background, regional connections, and personal opinions aren't innocent social curiosity theory, professional intelligence gathering designed to assess your potential value and threat level as a political actor. Your modern approach to casual conversation treats evening discussions as opportunities for genuine social connection and honest personal expression, rather than sophisticated intelligence operations where every question carries hidden agendas and every answer provides information that could prove politically significant. The alliance building that occurs during evening court activities follows protocols that combine personal relationship development with political strategy in ways that create lasting obligations and mutual dependencies that shape contemporary political dynamics. Medieval alliances weren't just temporary agreements between independent actors, they were complex social relationships that created ongoing obligations and expectations that influenced behavior and decision-making across multiple political situations and time periods. Understanding medieval alliance culture required knowledge of reciprocity traditions, honor codes, and obligation systems that governed relationships between individuals, families, and regional political entities according to principles that extended far beyond simple mutual benefit calculations or contemporary political convenience. The way you respond to seemingly casual offers of friendship, cooperation, or mutual assistance during evening conversations could create obligations and expectations that prove impossible to fulfill given your actual background and capabilities. Medieval alliance building operated according to assumptions about honor, reciprocity, and reliability that your modern cultural background provides no preparation for understanding or managing effectively. The marriage negotiations that often occur during evening court activities add another layer of complexity that reveals the inadequacy of your cultural knowledge for authentic medieval political participation. Medieval marriage wasn't just personal relationship formation, it was sophisticated political strategy that created family alliances, economic partnerships, and territorial agreements that could reshape political relationships and military capabilities across multiple generations. Understanding medieval marriage culture required extensive knowledge of inheritance laws, property rights, family obligations, and political implications that made marriage negotiations complex diplomatic challenges requiring careful attention to legal, economic, and political considerations that extended far beyond personal compatibility or romantic attraction. The seemingly casual conversations about eligible family members, appropriate matches, and marriage timing aren't innocent social chat theory, preliminary diplomatic negotiations that could lead to formal alliance proposals with significant political and economic implications for multiple families and regional political entities. Your modern approach to romantic relationships and marriage provides absolutely no preparation for the sophisticated medieval approach to marriage negotiation that treats family formation as serious political strategy rather than personal lifestyle choice or emotional satisfaction. The religious discussions that punctuate evening court activities serve political and social functions that extend far beyond simple spiritual reflection or theological debate. Medieval religious conversation provided safe frameworks for discussing sensitive political topics, testing loyalty and orthodoxy, and building relationships based on shared spiritual values and ecclesiastical connections that could prove politically valuable. Understanding medieval religious discourse required familiarity with contemporary theological debates, ecclesiastical politics, and spiritual traditions that shaped contemporary political culture and provided alternative sources of authority and legitimacy that could compete with or complement secular political power. The way you participate in religious conversations during evening activities reveals information about your educational background, family traditions, and political loyalties that experienced courtiers used to assess your reliability, orthodoxy, and potential value as a political ally or spiritual associate. Your modern religious knowledge, however extensive it might be in terms of contemporary theology or historical scholarship, lacks the specific medieval context that made religious discussion politically meaningful and personally significant for contemporary audiences. The military discussions that develop during evening court activities provide crucial opportunities for assessing contemporary security situations, testing loyalty and capabilities, and building relationships that could prove essential during military emergencies or territorial conflicts. Medieval courts existed in constant awareness of potential military threats, and evening conversations provided venues for the kind of frank strategic discussion that formal ceremonies couldn't accommodate. Understanding medieval military culture required knowledge of contemporary tactical developments, strategic principles, and honor codes that governed military service and combat behavior according to traditions that combined practical effectiveness with cultural values and social expectations. The seemingly casual questions about your military experience, family military traditions, and opinions about contemporary conflicts aren't innocent curiosity theory professional assessments designed to evaluate your potential military value and reliability as an ally during political or military crises. Your modern understanding of military affairs provides no preparation for the sophisticated medieval approach to military culture that treats warfare as fundamental political activity rather than specialized professional function or unfortunate emergency situation. The economic discussions that occur during evening court activities reveal the complex relationships between political power and economic resources that characterized medieval court culture. These conversations provide opportunities for assessing contemporary economic conditions, building trade relationships, and negotiating financial arrangements that could prove crucial for political survival and advancement. Understanding medieval economic culture required knowledge of contemporary trade relationships, financial systems, and resource management that shaped political relationships and military capabilities according to principles that differed significantly from modern economic theories and practices. The information management that occurs during evening court activities represents one of the most sophisticated and dangerous aspects of medieval political culture. The intelligence gathered, alliances formed, and relationships developed during these private conversations could prove crucial for survival and success, but the same information could prove devastating if it reached hostile audiences or was used inappropriately. Medieval courtiers developed elaborate systems for managing sensitive information, protecting sources, and controlling the distribution of intelligence that required sophisticated understanding of political relationships, communication networks, and security protocols that governed information sharing in environments where knowledge literally meant power and secrets could determine life or death. Historians still argue whether the complexity of medieval evening court activities represented necessary political functionality or elaborate social mechanisms designed to exclude outsiders and maintain aristocratic privilege through cultural barriers that prevented effective political participation by individuals without extensive court education and cultural background. As you navigate your first evening of medieval court politics, your unfamiliarity with conversation codes, alliance protocols, and information management becomes increasingly obvious to participants whose lives depend on their ability to conduct sophisticated political operations while maintaining appearances of casual social interaction during pleasant evening activities. The bedchamber rituals await, but your evening's political disasters have already established your reputation as someone who represents either an amusing curiosity or a potential security risk depending on how experienced courtiers interpret your cultural inadequacies and political ignorance. Remember that dangerous moment when you accidentally revealed information about your actual background during what you thought was casual conversation? The other courtiers are still analyzing the implications and wondering whether your presence represents opportunity or threat to their own political prospects and personal safety. The castle settles into its nighttime rhythm as servants extinguish torches in the common areas, and the remaining courtiers begin their final retreat to private chambers. But your day at medieval court is far from over. The bedchamber rituals represent the ultimate test of your fitness for this rarefied world-intimate ceremonies that strip away all pretense and reveal the fundamental inadequacies that have been accumulating throughout your disastrous attempt to navigate medieval court culture. Medieval royal and noble bedchamber activities weren't private personal routines, they were elaborate state ceremonies that served crucial political functions while addressing practical necessities of daily life. The process of preparing the monarch and high nobility for sleep involved dozens of participants following protocols that reflected the same hierarchical principles and cultural sophistication that governed every other aspect of court life, but with an intimacy that made mistakes and inadequacies impossible to hide or excuse. Your first shock comes when you realize that medieval privacy concepts bear absolutely no resemblance to modern expectations of personal space and individual autonomy. Medieval noble sleeping arrangements operated according to principles of hierarchy, protection, and political necessity that treated private space as communal territory where multiple individuals shared responsibilities for security, comfort, and ceremonial obligation according to complex social calculations. The sleeping chamber itself serves as a continuation of the public court rather than a retreat from it. Medieval bedchambers functioned as intimate political venues where crucial decisions were made, sensitive information was exchanged, and important relationships were developed in settings that combined personal vulnerability with political opportunity in ways that required sophisticated social skills and cultural knowledge to navigate safely. Understanding medieval bedchamber culture requires knowledge of contemporary political relationships, family obligations, and security concerns that shaped sleeping arrangements according to principles that prioritized political functionality over personal comfort or individual preference. The way bedchambers were arranged, who was permitted access, and what activities occurred in these spaces all reflected complex calculations about power, trust, and political necessity. Your modern assumptions about bedroom privacy and personal autonomy immediately conflict with medieval sleeping culture that treats rest as community activity requiring collective participation and shared responsibility rather than individual retreat from social obligation and political engagement. The undressing ritual alone presents challenges that reveal your complete unfamiliarity with medieval concepts of personal service, social hierarchy, and intimate ceremony. Medieval noble undressing wasn't just practical preparation for sleep, it was elaborate social ritual that encoded political relationships, cultural values, and personal obligations in ceremonial activities that served educational and diplomatic functions while addressing basic human needs. The servants responsible for undressing rituals weren't just domestic workers, they were trusted political associates whose access to intimate royal and noble spaces required careful security screening and ongoing loyalty assessment. These individuals often possessed detailed knowledge of political secrets, family relationships, and personal vulnerabilities that made their service both essential and potentially dangerous. Understanding the social dynamics of medieval undressing ceremonies requires knowledge of servant hierarchies, family loyalties, and political relationships that governed access to intimate noble spaces according to principles that combined practical service with political security and ceremonial significance. Your modern discomfort with intimate personal service reflects cultural values that medieval court life completely contradicts. Medieval nobility expected and required elaborate personal assistance that involved levels of physical intimacy and personal dependency that contemporary individuals would find disturbing or embarrassing. The clothing storage and maintenance protocols that accompany medieval bedchamber activities reveal another dimension of complexity that tests your understanding of material culture, social symbolism, and economic relationships. Medieval noble clothing required specialized care that involved multiple servants using techniques and materials that reflected the enormous economic investment that appropriate court dress represented. The way garments were removed, cleaned, stored, and prepared for future use followed elaborate procedures that protected valuable materials while maintaining the symbolic and practical functionality that made appropriate dress essential for political survival and social advancement. These weren't just practical housekeeping activities, they were sophisticated material culture management that required extensive knowledge and specialized skills. Understanding medieval clothing care culture requires knowledge of contemporary textile production, trade relationships, and economic systems that made appropriate noble dress both essential and enormously expensive according to standards that differed significantly from modern clothing costs and maintenance requirements. Your modern approach to clothing care provides no preparation for the intensive medieval approach to garment management that treats clothing as valuable political and economic resources rather than replaceable consumer goods or simple practical necessities. The personal hygiene rituals that occur in medieval bedchambers follow protocols that combine practical health considerations with cultural traditions and symbolic significance in ways that create elaborate ceremonial activities around basic human biological needs. Medieval noble hygiene wasn't just personal cleanliness, it was sophisticated cultural performance that demonstrated social status, political sophistication, and cultural refinement through elaborate ritual activities. The water, soaps, and cleaning materials used in evening hygiene rituals carried specific cultural and economic significance that reflected international trade relationships, regional production capabilities, and contemporary understanding of health and cleanliness according to principles that differed significantly from modern hygiene theories and practices. Understanding medieval hygiene culture requires knowledge of contemporary medical theories, cultural traditions, and economic relationships that shaped cleaning practices according to principles that combined practical health considerations with social symbolism and political communication. Your modern hygiene expectations and contemporary understanding of cleanliness provide no preparation for the sophisticated medieval approach to personal care that treats hygiene as serious cultural work rather than simple practical necessity or individual preference. The prayer and religious observance that concludes each day represents the final examination of your spiritual knowledge, cultural sophistication, and personal devotion according to standards that require extensive theological education and deep spiritual commitment. Medieval bedtime prayers weren't just personal spiritual reflection, they were sophisticated religious performance that demonstrated orthodoxy, cultural refinement, and spiritual authority through elaborate ritual activities. The prayers themselves often included complex theological concepts, political implications, and cultural references that required extensive religious education and contemporary political awareness to understand and perform appropriately according to standards that reflected contemporary spiritual expectations and political requirements. Understanding medieval evening prayer culture requires knowledge of contemporary theological developments, liturgical traditions, and religious politics that shaped spiritual practice according to principles that combined genuine devotion with political communication and cultural demonstration. Your modern religious background, however extensive it might be in terms of contemporary faith or historical knowledge, lacks the specific medieval context that made evening prayers politically meaningful and spiritually significant for contemporary audiences. The security arrangements that govern medieval bedchamber activities reveal the constant awareness of political danger and personal vulnerability that characterized medieval court life. Medieval noble sleeping required elaborate protection protocols that involved multiple guards, sophisticated communication systems, and careful access control that reflected contemporary understanding of political threats and personal security needs. The guards responsible for bedchamber security weren't just military personnel, they were trusted political associates whose loyalty and competence could determine survival during political crises or military emergencies. These individuals often possessed detailed knowledge of political relationships, security procedures, and personal vulnerabilities that made their service both essential and potentially dangerous. Understanding medieval security culture requires knowledge of contemporary military threats, political relationships, and protection techniques that shaped bedchamber arrangements according to principles that prioritized political survival over personal comfort or individual privacy. Your modern security expectations provide no preparation for the intensive medieval approach to personal protection that treats individual safety as collective political responsibility rather than personal right or individual concern. The final conversations and political activities that occur in medieval bedchambers often prove more significant than formal court ceremonies or official meetings. These intimate discussions provide opportunities for the kind of frank political communication impossible in public settings, creating venues for alliance building, information exchange, and strategic planning that could determine contemporary political outcomes and individual survival. Participating effectively in bedchamber political conversations requires sophisticated understanding of contemporary political dynamics, cultural protocols, and communication systems that govern intimate political discourse while maintaining appropriate respect for hierarchical relationships and personal vulnerability. Understanding medieval bedchamber politics requires knowledge of political relationships, communication networks, and strategic considerations that shaped contemporary political culture according to principles that combined personal intimacy with political functionality in ways that contemporary individuals would find difficult to understand or navigate effectively. Your modern political instincts provide no guidance for the complex medieval approach to intimate political communication that treats personal vulnerability as political opportunity rather than individual weakness or social disadvantage. As you finally settle into your sleeping arrangements sharing space with several other courtiers whose snoring, restlessness, and personal habits will disturb your rest throughout the night, you begin to understand the full scope of your failure to adapt to medieval court culture. Every ritual has revealed your ignorance. Every conversation has exposed your inadequacies. And every social interaction has demonstrated your fundamental unsuitability for this sophisticated political environment. The long day that began with simple wake-up protocols has become an exhausting examination that you've failed at every level. Your clothing marked you as an outsider. Your speech revealed your ignorance. Your dining behavior exposed your cultural inadequacies. Your religious observance demonstrated your spiritual limitations. Your entertainment participation showed your artistic deficiencies. Your evening conversations revealed your political naivety. And your bedchamber activities have confirmed your complete inability to understand the fundamental principles that organize medieval court culture. Tomorrow will bring new challenges and fresh opportunities for embarrassment. But tonight offers no respite from the social and political pressures that characterize medieval court life. As you close your eyes in your shared chamber, surrounded by the sounds and smells of authentic medieval living conditions, you understand with perfect clarity why survival in medieval courts required decades of specialized education and cultural preparation that no amount of modern historical knowledge or contemporary social skills could possibly provide. The reality of medieval court life extends far beyond romantic historical fantasies or simplified popular representations. It was a sophisticated political culture that demanded extensive knowledge, remarkable social skills, and extraordinary personal resilience from participants who understood that their survival depended on mastering systems of communication, behavior, and relationship management that operated according to principles completely alien to contemporary social experience. You drift toward uneasy sleep knowing that tomorrow will test you again in ways you can't anticipate or prepare for, while experienced courtiers around you rest easily in environments that feel as natural and comfortable to them as modern life feels to you. Your medieval court adventure has become a humbling reminder that historical periods aren't costumes to be worn or games to be played, complete cultural systems that required lifetimes of education and experience to navigate successfully. The castle settles deeper into nighttime quiet, but your mind continues racing through the day's disasters and tomorrow's dreaded possibilities. Medieval court life wasn't just different from modern experience, it was fundamentally alien in ways that made authentic participation nearly impossible for anyone not raised within its demanding cultural requirements and sophisticated political expectations. Sleep comes finally, bringing dreams filled with the echoes of conversations you misunderstood, protocols you violated, and opportunities you missed throughout your thoroughly unsuccessful first day attempting to survive in the complex, demanding, and utterly unforgiving world of medieval court culture. And now, as our journey through this medieval court nightmare comes to a gentle close, let yourself sink deeper into your modern bed with profound gratitude for central heating, private bathrooms, and the blessed anonymity of contemporary life. Feel the soft cotton sheets against your skin, so different from the rough linen and shared sleeping arrangements of our medieval courtier. Notice how quiet your bedroom is, free from the snoring chambermaids and constant political vigilance that characterized medieval noble rest. The candles have burned down to nothing in that distant castle, and the last whispered political conversations have faded into the stone corridors. Our hapless time traveler has learned, perhaps too late, that surviving in medieval court required not just knowledge, but a lifetime of cultural preparation that no amount of modern education could provide. The past, in all its complexity and demanding sophistication, reminds us that every historical period was complete unto itself, with systems of meaning and survival that seem almost impossibly intricate to contemporary eyes. Let the gentle absurdity of our medieval adventure lull you toward peaceful sleep, safe in the knowledge that your most demanding social obligation tomorrow might be a workplace meeting or family dinner challenges that pale in comparison to navigating the political minefields of a medieval royal court. Rest easy, knowing that you live in an age where privacy is possible, where mistakes are generally forgiven, and where survival doesn't depend on perfect execution of aristocratic protocols that took decades to master. Sweet dreams from our medieval court, where the morning bells will soon call courtiers to begin another day of elaborate rituals, political negotiations, and cultural performances that make our modern social challenges seem wonderfully, blessedly simple by comparison.